Bigfoot is not alone. Did you know that a hairy human/ape creature was found frozen in a block of ice? In this video, we'll dive into the incredible story of the Minnesota Iceman, the researchers who believed in it, and the truth behind one of the greatest mysteries in American history. Get your monster hunting gear on because we've got some American-made monsters coming up. The Minnesota Iceman. History is full of cold cases. In the winter of 1968, two respected scientists stood in a dim Midwestern garage, staring through cracked plexiglass at what looked like a corpse trapped in ice. Not just any corpse either, my friends. This was a hulking, hairy, human-shaped creature with one eyeball hanging out, a broken arm, and the face of something halfway between a Neanderthal and a car crash victim. One of the men would go on to claim it was a new species. The other would help turn it into one of the most infamous cryptozoological sagas of the 20th century. They called it the Minnesota Iceman, and the weirdness didn't stop there. What followed was a twisting, half-frozen mess of pseudoscience, speculation, Cold War rumors, Bigfoot fever, and good old-fashioned carnival hucksterism. It was the story of a supposed hominid cadaver that toured the United States in the back of a trailer and somehow fooled the scientific community, if only for a moment. Are you ready for the strange case of the Minnesota Iceman? Man in the Icebox. In late 1968, a man named Frank D. Hansen was hauling around a refrigerated exhibit featuring what he claimed was the preserved body of a mysterious human-like creature. The Iceman, as it was called, was displayed in a glass coffin encased in ice. It appeared to be the body of a roughly 6-foot-tall male hominid, covered in dark hair, barrel-chested, with massive hands and feet. Depending on who asked and what mood Hansen was in, the Iceman had different origin stories. He was the kind of guy who could make up a tall tale on the fly, but couldn't for the life of him remember any of his own wild stories. So he kept making up new ones. Hansen would say the body was found floating in ice near Siberia by a Russian seal hunting crew. Or he would say a Japanese whaling ship pulled it out of the ocean. Or it was stored in a Hong Kong meat locker, shot during a hunting trip in northern Minnesota, recovered from the jungles of Vietnam, somewhere near Da Nang, where Hansen himself had been stationed during the war. Each version contradicted the last, and just for fun, there was a long circulating rumor that Hollywood legend Jimmy Stewart somehow owned the thing, but that was never verified. Scientists get involved. America in the 1960s was drowning in roadside attractions. They were huge, and a lot of them had weird oddities that brought in guests to ooh and ah. They had things like shrunken heads, mummified animals, monkey's paws, giants, mermaids, the whole shebang. This whole Iceman thing could have died as fast as any other fairground attraction, except it didn't. Because Terry Cullen, a young naturalist, saw the Iceman at a livestock exposition in Chicago, and he thought, this seems like more than just a carnival freak show. He tipped off Ivan T. Sanderson, a British zoologist, writer, and one of the founding figures of cryptozoology. Sanderson visited Hansen's off-season garage exhibit in December 1968, bringing along Belgian-French zoologist Bernard Heuvelmans. Bernard was a man who had already published on the existence of undiscovered animals. The pair were obsessed with ghosts and ghouls. The two spent hours examining the body through the ice, and both were stunned by what they found. They described the Iceman as a genuine biological specimen. The duo claimed the creature had a broken radius and ulna in one arm, which were visible under the ice. One of its eyes hung grotesquely out of its socket, which is an injury consistent with a bullet wound to the back of the head. Wait, someone didn't assassinate this guy Hitman style, did they? The creature also had a flat nose, reminiscent of great apes. Its hands were enormous, with long, flat yellow fingernails. The thumb, Sanderson said, looked manicured. Now that's strange. Finally, a thick heel-like pad on the palm suggested the creature may have walked on all fours, or at least knuckle-walked like a gorilla. At one point during the examination, the glass display case cracked, releasing what both men later described as the unmistakable stench of decomposing flesh. It was enough to convince the scientists they were dealing with a real frozen caveman. A new species is born. Heuvelmans, convinced the creature was real, didn't waste any time. He published a formal description of the Iceman in a Belgian scientific journal in 1969. He named it Homo pongoides, which means ape-like man. His initial conclusion was that this was not merely a lost species, but a living Neanderthal. He really thought he had a frozen, extinct human species in a glass box like the ugliest version of Sleeping Beauty ever imagined. But he did back up his idea with what he believed to be real evidence, which he disclosed in his 1974 book. It was called The Neanderthal Man is Still Alive. It was co-written with Russian historian and crypto-hominid researcher Boris Porchnev. The book, the research, the frozen man, it was all enough to catch the attention of America's most important scientific institution, the Smithsonian. Dr. John Napier, a respected primatologist at the Smithsonian, got involved in the case. Napier examined the creature and promptly declared it a hoax. Talk about ruining the party. Dr. John showed up, took one look, and said, "This is obviously a latex dummy." And with that, the Smithsonian washed its hands of the situation. But Hansen wasn't about to give up his moneymaker. He responded like the craftiest con man ever. He said, "Oh, that wasn't the real Iceman. No. According to Hansen, he had pulled the real body from circulation after realizing it might be considered a homicide. Remember the dangling eyeball? Hansen said that he suspected someone may have murdered his Neanderthal, so he didn't want to be caught with a dead man in his freezer. It was a shoddy excuse, but Hansen wasn't about to admit he was deceiving everyone with a latex dummy. Sanderson even backed him up, insisting the specimen that John Napier saw was clearly different. And to be fair, photos taken over time did show some differences. In some pictures, the creature's mouth was closed. In others, it was open, revealing a full set of large, unnervingly human teeth. Maybe Hansen was telling the truth. Maybe he made a latex model and kept the real one stashed away somewhere secret. Then again, maybe it was just a poorly made prop melting like a sad birthday cake. The Iceman goes on eBay. Years went by and the scientific community forgot about the Iceman. No respected scientist would be caught dead near the thing, and carnivals were long gone by the time the iPhone came around. Kids can't be going to freak shows when they can debunk everything on Google. In 2013, the Iceman met the internet. A listing appeared online for the original Minnesota Iceman exhibit. It was bought by Steve Busty, owner of the Museum of Weird in Austin, Texas, where it is still on display right now. To this day, it looks almost exactly like what Sanderson and Heuvelmans described, but no one has managed to extract DNA from it, do tissue testing, or run a full autopsy. Maybe because Steve won't let the Iceman out of his glass box. Or maybe because it's just a chunk of molded rubber. Despite its quiet retirement from the scientific spotlight, what's truly amazing is that Heuvelmans' initial conviction about the Iceman's authenticity continued to ripple through cryptid culture. It wasn't Bigfoot, but it was close. It offered a template for interpreting future reports of wild, hairy people in Asia, Eastern Europe, and the Middle East. The Minnesota Iceman, despite Smithsonian scientists labeling it a hoax, became evidence of a secret race of forgotten hominins all over the world. In 1994, anthropologist Helmut Lufs-Wissowa pointed to Paleolithic cave art showing hairy, snub-nosed figures and interpreted them as Homo pongoides. Jordy McGrainer, a herpetologist and crypto-hominid researcher, collected over 20 eyewitness accounts in northern Pakistan describing a creature called the Bar Manu. The accounts matched many of the Iceman's features: barrel-chested, upturned nose, huge hands, hair-covered body. Soviet and Russian cryptozoologist Porchnev, Dmitry Bayanov, and Marie-Jean Kaufman gathered dozens of similar accounts across the Caucasus and Mongolia. How do you explain all of these examples? Could these all be unknown species of ancient hairy humans? Are they all related to Bigfoot? Let me know what you think in the comments. And now for a quick break because it's shoutout time. I want to give a big thank you to Les Wilson and Kylie Hunt for supporting this channel. Be sure to subscribe if you haven't already for more videos like this, and let me know what other creatures you'd like to hear about next. The Flatwoods Monster. What happened on the evening of September 12, 1952 in the wooded hills of central West Virginia changed a small town forever. Something crashed, literally and culturally. It sparked a mass panic, a military investigation, and a UFO legend that still refuses to die. What began as a strange light in the sky ended with terrified kids, a mom with nerves of steel, a dog who wanted none of it, and a monster that would come to define an entire town's identity. The town of Flatwoods, population 300, was suddenly on the front lines of what looked at the time like an alien invasion, and the United States Air Force took it seriously enough to send investigators. Not because it was obviously true, but because this was 1952. America was in the middle of the Cold War, the Red Scare, atomic bomb drills, and flying saucers dominating magazine covers. If ever there was a time for monsters, it was 1952. The sighting. It started with a flash, a glowing red light moving low and fast across the sky, arced downward and crashed into a nearby hill. 3 local boys, Ed May, Freddie May, and Tommy Heyer, were playing outside when they saw it go down. Now, if you saw a glowing red orb crash into the forest, what would you do? Well, these 3 boys weren't backing down from a little UFO crash. They ran home, grabbed Ed and Freddie's mom, Kathleen, and marched her up the hill to investigate. Word spread fast through the small community. Gene Lemon, a 17-year-old National Guardsman, joined the group on their impromptu expedition, along with a few more kids and one very reluctant dog named Ricky. The group grew to 7 people and the one 4-legged scout. Then, in the misty woods, they saw it. Lemon noticed a pair of glowing eyes staring from a tree. He screamed and fell backward. The others caught a glimpse of a creature that was 10 feet tall with a glowing green face, a blood-red body, and what looked like clawed hands. The creature was surrounded by a thick, choking mist that smelled metallic and acrid. The air was hot. The dog bolted. Lemon had to be helped down the hill, and one of the boys reportedly wet himself. As local newspaper, the Braxton Democrat would report, 7 Braxton County residents on Saturday reported seeing a 10-foot Frankenstein-like monster in the hills above Flatwoods. And thus, a legend was born. The aftermath. The story of the Flatwoods Monster spread like wildfire. By the next morning, the Charleston Gazette and other state papers had picked it up. Then the wires carried it nationally. Radio hosts had a field day with the event. CBS invited Kathleen May and Gene Lemon to New York for an interview. And that's when Project Blue Book got involved. Project Blue Book was no crackpot fan club. It was the U.S. Air Force's official investigatory group looking into UFOs. The project ran from 1952 to 1969. Its job was to separate fantasy from potential alien threats. Agents, actual men in black, were dispatched across the country to evaluate sightings of otherworldly beings, and Flatwoods was deemed important enough to investigate. And it wasn't just the witnesses who were rattled. A. Lee Stewart, the local newspaper publisher, went up the hill with a shotgun after hearing the kid's story. He couldn't help himself and had to see the scene of the incident. Stewart later said, "Those people were the most scared people I've ever seen. People don't make up that kind of story that quickly." Dang, sounds like Stewart was convinced, but not everyone was. Skepticism followed the initial monster reports. The West Virginia State Police called it hysteria. Some media outlets mocked it. The monster reportedly grew from 10 feet to 17 feet tall in a single day, like it was auditioning for a Godzilla sequel. Stewart himself never dismissed what he heard that night. Even as locals laughed it off, the kids didn't forget, and neither did the Air Force. What exactly did they see? There is absolutely no denying that something was seen in the forest outside Flatwoods on that fateful night. The question is, what? Alien? A sick wild animal? Perhaps a mutant bear or some kind of zombie deer? To be honest, the description of the creature is so insane that it's too hard to guess. But thanks to a sketch artist from New York who interviewed the witnesses, the creature was brought to life with uncanny clarity. And here it is, the original sketch of the Flatwoods Monster. What does it look like to you? Because I don't think it's a mutant bear. It looks like a walking light bulb. Some compared it to a robotic exosuit. Others thought it looked like a gothic space priest. Either way, it was unlike anything anyone had seen before or since, and that gives the story unique credibility. If the kids had wanted to make up some spooky story, they would have dreamed up your typical bug-eyed antenna-sporting alien. But the kids all gave the same description of such an unlikely being that it seems asinine to think they took the time to sync up their descriptions. Remember, these were kids playing around, not adults trying to make bank on seeing ET. And even though they were children, many locals believed them. Though not everyone, of course. There are always doubters. John Gibson, a Flatwoods native who knew the boys, put it bluntly by saying, "I don't believe in the Easter Bunny, I don't believe in Santa, and I really don't believe in the Flatwoods Monster. But I do want to boost our community." Gibson may not believe in the monster, but he has sold over 1,000 ceramic figurines of it at $30 a pop. And that was a few years ago. The things probably go for $50 these days. That's a healthy profit for a local legend that Gibson doesn't even believe in. The whole town of Flatwoods is in a similar boat. They opened a Flatwoods Monster Museum in the center of town, drawing in thousands of tourists a year. There are t-shirts, monster chairs, and souvenir cups galore. The story that once scared the nation now helps keep the lights on in Braxton County. Have you ever been to Flatwoods? If so, let me know what the experience was like. As for what the boys really saw in the forest that night, nobody knows. The Air Force's official explanation was a meteor. They claimed a meteor was spotted across 3 states that same night. By the Air Force's logic, the creature was probably nothing more than a barn owl perched on a tree limb, illuminated in a strange way by the falling meteor. The mist the boys saw swirling about the legs of the light bulb-headed alien may have been toxic gas from the crash. That said, those who were there that night stuck to their story for their whole lives. They truly believed they saw a monster. And now the town is making its living off their story, while the rest of us are left with more questions than answers. Do you believe in the Flatwoods Monster? The Lake Michigan Sea Serpent. Let's be brutally honest. If you christen your aquatic leviathan the Lake Michigan Sea Serpent, you're not exactly vying for an Oscar in originality. Compared to the allure of Nessie, the whispered dread of Champ, or the grotesque mystery of the Montauk Monster, this Midwestern cryptid's moniker lands with all the dramatic flair of a damp dish rag. But don't let the name fool you. For over 160 years, something has been quietly, relentlessly terrorizing those who dare to navigate the vast, cold expanse of Lake Michigan. Sailors, seasoned soldiers, weary fishermen, and unsuspecting passengers have all borne witness to inexplicable phenomena, to encounters that defy logic and shatter peace. This isn't just a regional tall tale. It's a persistent, unsettling presence that, despite its potential non-existence, still manages to dominate headlines, sabotage picnics, and on occasion, plunge hardened Navy personnel into chilling existential despair. 2 officers versus 1 monster. One of the most compelling early accounts happened on a clear, cold day in March 1893. The location is Fort Sheridan, north of Chicago, where Captain H.R. Brinkerhoff was enjoying a book and minding his own business. Suddenly, he saw something big moving in the water. Brinkerhoff shouted for backup. "Hey guys, there's a thing in the lake!" Lieutenant W.F. Blauvelt joined him, and together they watched the creature lurch through the icy water. Brinkerhoff told the Chicago Daily Tribune that it had a huge head, was dark on top, pale underneath, and vaguely alligator-ish. It was as if Nessie had married a gator and the child ran off to the Midwest. The captain and the lieutenant watched it flail through a patch of ice, describing a graceful, serpentine S-shape with its body as it turned and swam back out into the lake. The whole experience was so dramatic, 200 Fort Sheridan service members reportedly swore off alcohol in the aftermath. When asked by a skeptical reporter if there was any chance he and his fellow officers had made a mistake, Brinkerhoff doubled down and said, "We saw it. Don't know what it was, but we saw it." Sea serpents and summer vibes. While the Fort Sheridan encounter is a strikingly early account, reports of a Lake Michigan sea serpent actually predate it. Even before 1893, people were witnessing strange things in the water. Reports of a sea serpent in Lake Michigan date back to at least 1867, when the crew of the tugboat Crawford and the propeller Skylark claimed they nearly collided with a monster thrashing off the coast of Evanston. The crews of the two big ships described the creature as big, eel-like, and extremely antisocial. It was a 30 to 60 foot long introvert. Another account from 1895 had the serpent making rounds at local resorts, which suspiciously coincided with peak tourist season. The Tribune noted, dryly, that the serpent's presence seemed to increase interest in Lake Michigan as a summer destination. Imagine that. Come for the monster, stay because you already paid for the hotel. Something tells me the original sightings were real and then someone got a really good business idea. In 1904, after another sighting, more people were vacationing along the lake than ever before. Could the sea serpent have been a capitalist? Or just a misunderstood intern in the Chamber of Commerce? The ship captain. Decades later, in September 1934, Captain G.E. Stufflebeam, a name so whimsical it sounds straight out of a Care Bear cartoon, was commanding the USS Theodore Roosevelt. It was a Navy troop ship turned Great Lakes passenger liner. They were about 4 miles offshore, minding their own business, when lookout Donald Steele spotted something strange and shouted, "Sea serpent ahoy!" Steele was not messing around. Sure enough, Stufflebeam confirmed that there was indeed a sea serpent ahoy. The whole crew saw something huge, twisting and swimming faster than the ship itself. The sheer horror of what the crew was witnessing led them to hurl their liquor bottles overboard. Are you getting deja vu? Is the sea monster some sort of anti-alcoholic? Is it working for mothers against drunk drivers? If nothing else, this monster was a surprisingly effective substance abuse counselor. More sightings. Not all sightings were the stuff of monster mythology. Some were just, let's say, unfortunate. In 1903, a fisherman off 22nd Street swore he saw the serpent. However, it turned out to be Big Ben, a sea lion who'd made a daring escape from the Lincoln Park Zoo. Classic monster/sea lion mix-up. In 1943, local legend Charles Pickles Krager, known for spinning yarns more complex than a spider's web, described pulling in sea monsters like most people describe collecting coupons. He was always spotting the monster, like how Peter Parker is always spotting Spider-Man. Not exactly the most reliable witness. The vanishing monster. As time rolled on and scientific skepticism became more intense, the serpent faded into folklore. The mid-20th century marked a shift from monster spotted to remember when we used to think monsters were real? The monster was almost completely forgotten until a grainy live stream out of South Haven, Michigan went viral. A local man filmed rough waves in 40-mile-per-hour winds, and viewers noticed what looked like a long serpentine shape slithering through the chaos. The internet went nuts. For many, it was a monster sighting, which was enough to rekindle an old fascination. Over the past few years, people have been growing more and more obsessed with whatever lurks in Lake Michigan. But for all our live streams, selfies, drones, and satellites, the monster continues to elude us. It only seems to appear in blurry videos as something that could be a monster or a clump of seaweed. It's not enough evidence to convince scientists, but it's just enough evidence to keep the legend alive. The Lake Michigan sea serpent might not be showing itself because the world is in too much trouble. In 1933, a newspaper writer observed that sea serpents around the globe only appear during, and I quote, "those moments of human experience which are the despair of historians because they are dull, and the joy of peoples because they are happy and carefree." In other words, sea serpents are only sighted when the world is at ease. And right now, the world is anything but at ease. Until things chill out and people are happy and carefree again, the serpents of the world may remain in hiding. Then again, maybe that newspaper writer was off his nut and there are no sea serpents, only reflections, wet ropes, monster-shaped logs, and human fear. For now, keep watching the water, my friends. You just never know what you might see. Vermont's winged terror. Something screeched through the skies over Richford, Vermont in 1925. Or maybe it didn't. That's the thing about legends. They don't leave footprints, they leave confusion. According to whispers that have drifted through the Green Mountains for nearly a century, a creature so ghastly, so unnatural, and so profoundly ridiculous stalked the town that locals gave it the simplest name they could think of: the Awful. I guess they could have called it the Vermont Monster or the Green Mountain Gargoyle, but no. They went with a surprisingly blunt, yet somehow chilling name: the Awful. It's the same name you have your ex under in your contacts. Listen to the description of this creature and tell me it isn't awful. It's like a griffin, complete with a 20-foot wingspan, giant claws, and a reptilian tail. Only it isn't majestic like a griffin, it's more like the Mothman mixed with a pterodactyl. Honestly, it sounds like something from a future where all normal animals have been turned into freakish mutants. This thing, the Awful, has supposedly haunted the misty backroads of northern Vermont for nearly 100 years. It's said to have struck so much fear into grown men that one allegedly collapsed on the spot. You know you're an ugly monster when someone sees you and drops dead. The Awful even earned the attention of horror titan H.P. Lovecraft, who, if you believe the rumors, traveled to Vermont to see the thing himself. It was so freakishly hideous that it inspired Lovecraft to create his most famous character, a character rooted deep in popular culture. I'm talking about Cthulhu, the Ancient One, the tentacled primeval being from distant stars. Lovecraft cooked up Cthulhu, supposedly based on the Awful of Vermont. I hope someone's sending it royalty checks. Let's see if we can track down the monster and make some sense of the myth. Terror on the Rooftop. The story begins in 1925 in the sleepy towns of Richford and Berkshire, Vermont. The area, nestled in the state's northernmost woods near the Canadian border, is remote and quiet. It's the kind of place where something massive with wings and a tail could hypothetically hang out unnoticed in the dark trees. As the story goes, two mill workers were crossing a bridge in Richford when they spotted a massive gray-winged creature perched on top of the Boatwright building. This wasn't your run-of-the-mill barn owl, no matter how badly scientists want to convince you. The men described it as a griffin, but much more terrifying. One of the men was so overwhelmed by the sight that he collapsed from fright and suffered a heart attack on the spot. He survived, thankfully, but was reportedly haunted by vivid nightmares for weeks. And so would you if a griffin from hell gave you a heart attack. According to their description, the creature had a wingspan of at least 20 feet, grayish wings, possibly feathered or scaled. It was tough to see while the guy was clutching his heart and falling over. It also had enormous claws, a long snake-like tail, and a face that was more alien than anything else. It didn't attack anyone, it just sat there watching, like the creepiest cryptid with a stalking problem. The Awful takes a victory lap. 2 weeks after the first sighting, the creature returned. This time with an attitude. Locals claimed they saw the Awful soaring over the treetops with what appeared to be a baby or a small child clutched in its talons. However, there were no missing children reports to make sense of it. Where did the Awful find its own baby? Locals began to panic. Little by little, the town was gripped with hysteria. If they could have, they probably would have started rounding up witches and holding trials. The creature was now being seen regularly, most often by terrified farmers. They described it as either perched ominously on their rooftops like a gargoyle or messing around with their crops. Then, as quickly as the paranoia and hysteria grew to a cacophony of panic, it all went away. Around the beginning of 1928, people realized the sightings had tapered off. The Awful had gone on vacation. Sightings reawakened. The Awful seemed to be gone for good. Decades went by and nobody even talked about the thing. Then Lisa Maskell, a Vermont resident, came forward with her own childhood memory. Lisa claimed that as a young girl growing up in Montgomery, she'd seen something monstrous near Trout River. Years later, she saw a drawing of a pterodactyl and swore it matched the creature from her memory. This would have been a passing anecdote, or just another blurry page in the cryptid scrapbook, if not for what came next. A real discussion was sparked. Could a solitary pterodactyl somehow be alive in the Vermont wilderness? In 2006, local journalist H.P. Albarelli published an article in the County Courier titled, "Has the Awful Returned to Berkshire and Richford?" In the piece, Albarelli quoted a local eyewitness who claimed to have seen the awful materialize out of nowhere and snatch a black crow from a tree. This, of course, led to a flurry of new reports. Suddenly, everyone remembered seeing something. After years, the story had legs again. Or maybe a more appropriate thing to say would be that the story regrew its wings. A follow-up piece came out on November 30th, 2006, this time titled, "The Awful Sighted Again, Relic Produced." Albarelli claimed that someone, who remains unnamed, gave him a petrified jawbone, allegedly from the awful. The jawbone seemed to suggest that there were others like the awful, and that they had been living in Vermont for a very, very long time, maybe all the way back to the Cretaceous. Albarelli said he was taking it to a biologist at the University of Vermont for identification and promised to write a follow-up article with the results. That follow-up never came, and when you start digging into Albarelli's past, you start to see some serious problems. If the awful had been seen in 1925 and truly terrified a town, you'd expect somebody, be it a journalist, a folklorist, a town gossip, to have written it down. But the earliest known mention of the awful is in Albarelli's 2006 article. That is an 81-year gap. There are no 1925 newspaper clippings, no town records, no local legends passed through generations. There is not a speck of truth that the awful ever existed, yet it remains one of Vermont's most legendary cryptids. I don't know if it was a hoax, but the story does seem to begin and end with H.P. Albarelli, which almost certainly is not his real name. He's the guy who created the rumor about H.P. Lovecraft meeting the awful and using it as inspiration. And his name also happens to be H.P.? The awful has all the elements of a good story: small-town paranoia, winged monsters, sudden vanishings, and the lure of cosmic horror. But when you strip away the headlines and realize one guy with a fake name may have cooked up the whole thing, it makes you question everything. Is the awful a real cryptid? Did any of the freakish creatures I told you about today ever exist? Let me know your thoughts in the comments, and thank you for spending time with me today. Be sure to subscribe and hit that notification bell so you don't miss out. See you in the next one. Bye!